Listen closely. Every horror story wears a mask, but behind some masks are real names, real towns, and living echoes that never quite fade. Tonight, we don't chase monsters. We listen to the people who had to live with them. It begins in ordinary places. A farmhouse tucked into a quiet Midwestern sky. A college town breathing late summer heat. A suburban home with a black shuttered stair. Places where porch lights glow like tiny promises. You're safe here. Then the lights flicker. This story follows you. Someone who grew up on scary movies, who pressed pause to catch your breath and whispered, "It's only a film." And it follows the communities who never got to press pause. Plainfield, Gainesville, Amityville. You'll root for them, not against a monster, but against forgetting. Because forgetting is how a nightmare becomes entertainment. Here's the trouble. When real pain becomes myth, we risk losing the human center. Movies can illuminate truth or erase it. We want to feel fear without harm. But what do we owe the people whose lives were borrowed to build our favorite scenes? A door opens on a creaking hinge in rural Wisconsin. We won't show you what the police found. We won't need to. What matters is the shape of the aftermath. In 1957, a man named Ed Gein is arrested, and something in the American imagination splits. Domesticity turns uncanny, and the family home becomes a haunted archetype. Filmmakers, novelists, and audiences struggle to translate that shock. The result is three of the most influential horror and thriller pillars of the last century. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chain Saw Massacre, and Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs, all drawing on Gein-esque crimes and the morbid artifacts of his private world. Leatherface, Norman Bates, Buffalo Bill, each a fictional mask molded from pieces of that true story. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre also drew on other criminal histories, a reminder that inspired by is rarely a straight line, but a collage of American fears. But here's the twist. None of those films are about Ed Gein. They are about us. About the dread that the safest spaces, mother's voice, family dinner, the house on the hill, can be treacherous. Gein didn't invent that dread. He revealed it. The art that followed just held up a mirror. Imagine a small town street emptied by winter, a single upstairs window glowing. In Psycho, that window belongs to Norman's mother. In our real world, it belongs to a town trying to sleep after the sirens go silent. Neighbors bringing casseroles, shopkeepers speaking in whispers, reporters pressing microphones too close. Horror in fiction feels complete in 2 hours. In real life, it lingers in the produce aisle, in church pews, in the way people lock a door twice. Another door opens, this time in North Florida. Gainesville in August is humid and hopeful. Students move in with secondhand couches and first-time freedoms. Then the fear arrives, uninvited. In 1990, Danny Rolling murders 5 college students across 3 days. The city holds its breath and learns how silence can be louder than sirens. The crimes, and the panic they caused, later inspire the slasher that revitalized a genre. Scream. His admitted violence stretched beyond Gainesville. He confessed to other killings in Louisiana. Another reminder that horror rarely begins where we first notice it. You think you know Scream, the phone call, the rule breaking, the meta wink at movie tropes. But the real engine beneath it is community fear. A campus turned into a maze, young people sleeping in shifts, neighbors checking on each other at 3 a.m. That's the part that doesn't make the poster. Rolling's history included voyeurism that escalated over time, peering through windows, learning routines, transforming curiosity into predation, behavior documented by those who studied the case. In the movie, a ringing phone becomes a weapon. In Gainesville, the weapon was the feeling that someone was already in the room. Somewhere else, a house listens. Long Island, 1974. A young man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. walks into a bar and says his parents have been shot. Police arrive to a quiet suburban nightmare. 6 family members killed as they slept. DeFeo confesses. Later, he tells police the house made him do it. The voices. A line that will become legend and controversy rolled into one. The murders precede the book, then the film, and then a franchise, the Amityville Horror, where the house becomes the main character and the audience wonders whether bricks can hold a grudge. Here's the question that haunts Amityville. When a story says a house is evil, whose voice are we really hearing? The walls, the writer, or our need to make chaos make sense? Some investigators and reporters focus on motive and money, while others chase the paranormal. The debate is part of why the story endures. DeFeo's trial pivots on sanity and motive, not on whether he pulled the trigger. He did, but on why. Over the years, competing narratives bloom. Abuse, desperation, greed, possession. Public imagination fills the gaps. Horror feeds on ambiguity, because ambiguity is the oxygen of fear. Return to the movies. Psycho isn't a biography. It's a parable about identity and repression. Norman Bates is a son trapped by a voice that isn't entirely his, a fiction that echoes the real world without claiming it whole. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre is not a crime scene. It's an American fever dream about isolation, family loyalty gone rancid, and the cost of looking away. The Silence of the Lambs gives us a killer who skins victims, an echo of Gein's grotesque trophies. But the point of the story is Clarice Starling, a trainee whose courage cuts through rooms where power has always been male, violent, and unchallenged. And Scream, it teaches us how horror works while we're watching it. It's cinema holding your hand and whispering, "You know these rules," while reminding you that rules 1 save you if someone decides they don't apply to you. Expert voices, real and remembered, help anchor these intersections. Once I started, I just couldn't stop, DeFeo reportedly told police after confessing, a quote repeated in coverage that keeps the human, terrible bluntness of his admission front and center. He also claimed, "The voices from the house made him do it," words used to frame the legend that followed. Across decades, coverage of Gein ties those seismic films directly to his crimes, documenting how fact metastasized into fiction that still shapes the genre. And retrospective analyses describe how Rolling's case influenced Scream's creation, translating community terror into a pop cultural phenomenon. Now ask the uneasy question: why do we keep returning to these films? Maybe because fear when rehearsed safely becomes a rehearsal for courage. Maybe because if we can name the monster, even a fictional one, we can make the unknown a little smaller. But naming is power. We have to name the people who were harmed too. So let's say the quiet parts out loud. The great horror films that borrow from real crimes are not monuments to killers. They are memorials to our vulnerabilities. They are maps of how communities bend and do not break. The most important characters are often the ones who refuse to become symbols. A classmate who walks you home, a cop who doubles back, a neighbor who leaves a porch light on until dawn. Here is the turning point. We realize the real antagonist isn't a masked figure or a haunted house. It's our own temptation to turn people into plot points and never look back. When we learn that Norman Bates' Leatherface and Buffalo Bill trace lines back to a Wisconsin farmhouse, we aren't meant to romanticize the source. We meant to confront how thin the walls are between ordinary life and unimaginable harm. When we learn that Scream's cleverness was sparked by a real town's nightmare, we're meant to hear the frightened silence beneath the audience laughter. When we revisit Amityville, we're meant to separate what can be proven from what comforts us, even if what comforts us is a ghost story. So what changes? Maybe this. The next time we press play, we bring names with us. We remember that behind the archetypes are people whose stories didn't have credits. We can still feel the thrill. Suspense is part of being human. But we can pair it with care. We can ask, who is centered and who is missing? And we can choose to center the ones who were hurt. In the end, horror doesn't teach us how to love monsters. It teaches us how to love each other in the dark. The best films aren't about the kills. They're about the courage to keep the porch light on, to knock on a neighbor's door at 3 a.m., to say, "I'm here" when someone needs to hear it. Remember this. Stories can take from the real world, or they can give something back. Let's choose to give. Attention, empathy, context. If this moved you, share the moment that changed how you see a horror film. Whose story do you carry now when the credits roll? And if there's a case you think we should revisit with care, tell us why. Because the conversation we have after the movie ends That's where the light comes back on. According to Britannica, Gein's crimes inspired Psycho, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs, with TCM also drawing influence from other cases. Reporting and retrospectives consistently connect Gein to the fictional figures of Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill. A&E's coverage and other records detail how Danny Rolling Gainesville murders and his voyeurism influenced Scream. Coverage of Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s case documents the 1974 murders, his confession, the Voices claim, and the cultural afterlife in the Amityville Horror.